What's ahead for our property markets this year? Is it time to be fearful or time to be greedy? Now, having invested for close to 50 years, I've got a different level of perspective to many people making commentary on our property markets. And in today's show, I'm going to go back in history to a time that was similar to the current economic climate because I want to give you some context. And then I'm going to explain to you what I see ahead for property in the short term and in the long term. Now, we survived 2020, and 2021 is going to be another interesting year. There's going to be lots of positive things happening, but there's no doubt we're going to have our share of challenges as well. Because even though we're over the recession, there's still going to be fallout from the recession to deal with, and clearly we're going to keep getting reminders about coronavirus coming out of the blue. And every year, there's an unexpected X factor. Now, I don't know what it's going to be, otherwise it wouldn't be an X factor. But hopefully in my discussion today, I'm going to give you some clarity and some direction moving forward for our property markets. However, there is one thing I can assure you will happen this year. The typical property pessimists are going to be out there again, telling us our property market's going to crash. Now, I could tell you their names, but I don't want to shame or embarrass them, but you probably know who they are. They're the same people who last year told us property values were going to drop 20, 30, or even 40%. They're the same people who told us in 2018 property values could drop 40 or 50%. Hey, do you remember that 60 Minutes program? I believe it was the highest rated show for the year, where one of those commentators was out there scaring fellow Australians. But they've been doing that for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And as long as I've been around over the last 20 years having a public profile in property, much the same commentators have been worried about our property markets. Yet the median price of well-located properties has just kept going up and up. Sure, it's been interrupted by the cyclical downturns. Actually, that's what's been happening to property values for close to 200 years, hasn't it? Anyway, we'll discuss a bit about what's ahead for our property this year, and in my mindset moment, I'm going to teach you one of the most useful lessons you can pass on to your children and grandchildren. And even if you don't have any children, or you're not planning to have any children, this money lesson will be critical for you if you want to obtain financial freedom. So, welcome, and I look forward to sharing the next half an hour or so with you.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
What should you be doing with property in 2021? Is it time to be fearful, or is it the right time to be greedy? Now, I know many investors are confused at the moment. They're concerned about some of the remaining issues related to coronavirus, high unemployment, the government debt, and the many mixed messages forecasting what's ahead for our economy and our property markets. While we're officially out of recession, clearly there are still many headwinds, and we don't have to look far to be reminded that the coronavirus hasn't really gone away, has it? I've noticed two types of emotions in those interested in property. Last year, as it became clear that our property markets wouldn't crash like some property pessimists predicted, phobia was the predominant sentiment. Fear of buying too early. Phobia. Home buyers and investors, they would try to time the market, wondering, what if prices fall further? Maybe I shouldn't buy just yet. But now, as it's become very clear our property market's moving forward fast, FOMO, the fear of missing out, is creeping back as house prices are rising faster than some people can save. Now, it's been said the two most powerful emotions that drive markets are fear and greed. In fact, master investor Warren Buffett advised, he said, "I'll tell you how to become rich. Be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful." So today I'd like to give you my thoughts on this with a lesson from history. 28 years ago, as Australia was working its way out of the recession we had to have, few would have thought that property was a good investment. It was 1993. Interest rates had come down 3% over the previous couple of years as the Reserve Bank tried to stimulate the economy and tried to improve our faltering property markets. Oh, by the way, this brought interest rates down to 10%, the lowest level they'd been in 13 years. Boy, I remember I was happy if my home loan rate was less than 10%. Anyway, having just experienced the first Australian recession in a long time, consumers and business confidence was low, and there were too many properties on the market for sale, buyers were scarce, and some properties, particularly at the top end, that recession, properties at the top end suffered the most. In fact, many of them plummeted in value considerably. A few years earlier on, Black Monday in October 87 saw a stock market collapse of unprecedented size. It started in Wall Street and its effects reverberated around the world, including here to Australia. However, while the stock market eventually recovered, the lumbering savings and loan industry in the United States, that was the way a lot of American homes were financed, was beginning to collapse. And this led to a property funding crisis, which put the financial being of many Americans into jeopardy, but it spread around the world. The financial contagion spread to other financial sectors, and that eventually led to a recession which hit other countries, including Canada, including the United Kingdom and Australia. Anyway, back to 1993. What was happening in property then? Well, you could buy a typical house in Sydney for $173,000. The median house price in Melbourne was $138,000. In Brisbane, it was $121,000. A typical house in Perth was $102,000. Interestingly, Canberra was the second most expensive property market in Australia, with a median price of $156,000. $110,000 would buy the median price home in Adelaide, $96,000 in Hobart, and you'd have to pay $132,000 to get that median price home in Darwin. Remember, that was about 3 decades ago. Well, over the subsequent 3 decades, the value of many well-located capital city properties around Australia quadrupled. And that underscored the wealth of many baby boomers today, and it created significant property empires for those who took property investing seriously. Now, interestingly, today's environment reminds me of those times 28 years ago. We're working our way out of the recession we decided to have, rather than the one we had to have in the 1990s. And just like then, many of the same arguments are being floated by commentators explaining why property values can't keep increasing as they did over the previous 3 decades. Now, I remember them saying that in the 90s. I even remember them saying that in the 80s. Gee, I've been around a while, haven't I? Anyway, I accept that some of the gains over the last 3 decades were related to structural changes that won't be repeated. 2 of the significant structural changes that caused massive growth in properties over those 3 decades, the last 28, 30 years, was, first of all, the Reserve Bank managed to keep inflation under control. It wasn't doing that too well before, and that meant interest rates could fall. At a time also when banks started to become more deregulated, and this allowed non-bank lenders to come in. The first one I remember was Aussie John Simon, and he made cheap finance available to home buyers and investors, and eventually credit became cheaper, credit became easier. At the same time, wages grew, and there were more 2 household incomes as women entered the workforce. Now, I know you take all this for granted today, but I'm just going back in history explaining why there was significant capital growth in properties, because finance was cheaper and wages increased and households had more income, which meant Australian families were able to afford more, buy new homes, upgrade their existing homes as their families grew. Now, clearly, these factors won't carry our markets forward in the future. In fact, they played out a few years ago, and they really haven't been as relevant for much of the last decade. Currently, we're in a low inflationary environment and a low interest rate environment, not only in Australia but around the world. So it means there's no room really, for lowering interest rates more to fuel the housing market. And the effect of the extra spending power of low interest rates, well, that's washed its way through the system as well. We've had them for a while now. And currently we're in a period of lower wages growth, more part-time jobs. The economy hasn't picked up completely after the recession yet. And it's unlikely then that the Australian family is going to have a lot more cash in their pockets to spend on property. And yes, there's still going to be some economic fallout from the recession we decided to have. But here's why I believe property values are going to increase in the short term, and in a moment I'll also explain to you why I believe they're going to increase over the long term. But you've heard me say it before, property's a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. If the ability to borrow money is easy, then property values increase. And when the banks tighten the screws and make it harder to borrow, property values languish. Now, just look back a few years ago. That was before we had the economic issues related to COVID. There was the Haynes Royal Commission, and just before it and just after it, the lenders got jittery. They made it harder to borrow, and that slowed down our property markets, didn't it? On the other hand, last year people learned that neither a pandemic, a recession, rising unemployment decimated our housing markets. In fact, falling interest rates made finance cheaper, and that was much, much more important than all those economic factors. Back to what I said a moment ago. Property is a game of finance. Now, in the past, the Reserve Bank's been able to make borrowing easier, been able to make it cheaper by lowering interest rates. But that really can't happen anymore, can it? However, the big game changer that's going to bolster our property markets moving forward this year is the loosening of the restrictions of bank lending. Remember, that was announced by Treasurer Josh Frydenberg at the end of last year. And that's going to happen in March this year, when the average home buyer and property investor should be able to borrow significantly more. Remember, property investment's a game of finance. But more than that, I also see a perfect storm of other factors developing that's going to all come together, multiple growth drivers that are going to propel our property markets in 2021 and into next year. See, often once you get a good year of property growth, as I believe we're going to be getting in 2021, more people come into the market. FOMO, like I said right at the beginning, comes in where people fear of missing out. And so once you get one good year of property growth, often you get another year or two, and that's what's going to happen over the next couple of years. And let me again explain why. Firstly, our economy is improving. Yeah, there's problems, but we're creating jobs, consumer confidence is increasing, business confidence is increasing. And this leads to spending. Consumers are spending more because they feel more secure in their jobs. And at the end of last year, they saved, they stashed up their cash, so consumers have got money to spend on themselves, but also on their homes. At the end of last year, auction clearance rates were consistently strong in the last few months of the year, not just in our big two capital cities, Melbourne and Sydney, where the auctions tend to be a larger portion of the property sales, but also around Australia. Also, we finished off last year with more buyers and sellers in the market, and transaction numbers increased considerably. And at the same time, the banks are keen to write more business. That's another positive for our housing market, just harking back to what I said before about how important finance is. And the issues that we were worried about, the deferrals of home loans, remember the fiscal cliff that people thought were going to fall over? Well, that's not going to happen. It may not even be much of a step down. Deferrals have been falling. There's no chance of an avalanche of forced mortgagee sales that people were worried about to depress our housing markets. And the rate cut, the last one we had, it's probably going to be the last one for a long time, also came with a guarantee that, well, from the Reserve Bank, from Governor Philip Lowe, that interest rates are going to remain low for at least 3 years. And this is going to give home buyers and investors confidence to borrow, knowing they're not going to get caught out in the short term. So, as I said, I see a confluence of a number of factors that are going to underpin our property markets in the short term. What about the long term? Well, having said that, I also see long-term fundamentals for our economy and property being strong. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we're going to have widespread double-digit growth in property values for a while, or even again. Even some suburbs are going to enjoy very strong double-digit growth. However, we don't have the high rates of inflation like we had in the 80s and 90s that required that type of capital growth to produce real after inflation returns. Remember, when my interest rates dropped to 10%, as I mentioned a short while ago, inflation was really high and capital growth was double digit, but you needed that because you wanted real growth above inflation. Anyway, it's important to understand that while many factors like interest rates, supply and demand, market confidence, they all affect our property values in the short term. In the long term, over the decades, property values are driven by two main factors: population growth and the wealth of the nation. The wealth of the nation really has to do with the ability to borrow and borrow more and actually repay debt as well, isn't it? Now, despite our international borders currently being closed, Australia's strong future population growth, that's a given. It's a matter of fact, as is our increasing wealth. And this is positive, this is strong for the long-term growth of our property values. The fact remains, as long as people are going to keep having children and residents from other countries seek to settle on our shores, Australia's population is going to keep growing at a rate faster than almost every other developed nation. Now, I know it's slowed down in the short term, but the borders will reopen again. And Australia has a business plan to significantly increase its population growth. It knows it needs to increase its population growth to help our economy grow. If there are more people here earning, paying taxes, making the wheels of industry go around, that's going to put more money in the bank office to pay off some of their debts. Now, Australia's population was forecast to grow to 30 million people by 2030. Well, look, we may only grow to 29 million people in that time frame. That's still a significant increase in our population over the next decade. And there are suggestions that our population should reach 40 million people by 2050. Remember, the government, in fact, both sides of Parliament, want our population, recognise our population needs to grow. Now, until recently, 55% of our population growth was due to immigration. And in general, these were well-educated people, particularly from Southeast Asia, who were in their 20s and 30s, which is the family formation stage of life. The fact is we're going to need whole cities of new immigrants to replace the 5 million or so baby boomers who are going to be leaving the workforce over the next 15 years. So the government's going to keep increasing our population. And hey, by the way, the baby boomers are not going anywhere. They're just going to slow down. So we need a lot more accommodation. That's going to be strong for our property markets. And the new residents are going to boost our economic well-being through the revenue raised from income taxes and all the goods and services they buy. And yes, that also includes property. Of course, this means more and more of us are going to want to live in the same 4 big capital cities, and in particular Melbourne, which is going to probably outgrow Sydney over the next decade or two, and Sydney. Melbourne and Sydney are going to remain the economic powerhouses of Australia, and Brisbane and Perth are going to be the new world cities of Australia. But most of those people are even going to want to live in the same suburbs in those capital cities. And that means our old friend, supply and demand, is going to keep pushing up values of well-located inner suburban properties. Now, inevitably, that's going to mean that some properties are going to be unaffordable for some people, and they're going to remain as tenants. However, others are going to be able to afford these higher priced properties. It also means that moving forward, apartments and townhouses are likely to become the style of accommodation that's going to be in strong demand. Now, I know apartments are not in strong demand at the moment, partly because of the issues of COVID, but I'm not suggesting that you should go off and buy a high-rise apartment in one of those new towers or an off-the-plan apartment, but established apartments in great suburbs, in well-located blocks, small blocks, walk-up blocks, they're going to make good investments. And in particular, townhouses are likely to become the style of accommodation in strong demand by more people who are going to want to swap their backyards for courtyards, or if they're going to buy an apartment for balconies, partly because of the cost, but in particular for the lifestyle choices. They're going to be trading space, big backyards, for place, being in the right location. Now, you've heard me prattle on about it before, but please excuse me if I remind you how COVID has made neighbourhoods more important than ever, location more than ever important. Something that demographers and urban planners call the third place. Your first place is your home. The second place is the office. But during COVID, for many of Australians who were stuck at home, they realised the third place was very important as well. It could be their favourite cafe or a gym or a place of worship or shops or pubs. So location and suburbs, livable suburbs, desirable suburbs are going to become more and more important than ever. Remember, during those difficult times last year of lockdown, people missed the feeling and connection to others, having an outlet to take a break, and so therefore proximity to things is going to be very important. Being able to walk, being able to cycle, or being able to drive to your gym, to green spaces, to fresh air, all these are going to combine and create huge demand moving forward. Features of what you've heard me talk about before, this 20-minute neighbourhood, that's going to be built around convenience. Look, wouldn't it be nice to have all those things that you're wanting in a day just a short walk or short drive away? As I said, in urban planning terms, this is called a 20-minute neighbourhood. Now, I understand the benefit of that. I'm very lucky to live in a great neighbourhood where I don't have to go very far at all to picture theatres, gyms, a bunch of restaurants, not just one supermarket, but a batch of supermarkets and a whole lot of good schools. Now, understanding these factors forms part of the research data that we use at Metropole to help our clients find investment-grade properties, or we help homeowners buy A-grade homes. So it's going to be important to understand what sort of neighbourhoods and what sort of properties are going to be in continuous strong demand moving forward. But back to why I'm confident and comfortable that property values are going to keep increasing in the long term. See, there's lots of good economic news at the moment. Now, if you're reading the general media, you'd be forgiven for feeling a little bit pessimistic about the state of our nation, but maybe you've missed some of the good news. The recession we experienced in 2020 wasn't due to a fundamental problem with our economy. It was our government putting the economy on hold to get a health problem under control. But our economy is on the move again, and it's likely to keep growing strongly over the next couple of years. And that's despite the geopolitical problems and the trade challenges. Yeah, we are going to keep facing them, aren't we? But Australia's economy is well positioned to keep growing strongly, and we're going to find new and other trading partners. So the bottom line of my discussion with you today is that while nothing in life is guaranteed, if, like me, you're confident that Australia's got a prosperous future, and if you agree that our population is going to keep increasing, and if you agree that most of us are going to want to live in much the same parts of our lucky country, you can understand why I see strong long-term future for our capital city property markets. Now, sure, there's a risk in buying a property during these changing times, but don't forget, there's also a risk in not getting involved in property, because I think you've learned the importance of being in control of your financial future, considering that the government's not going to do a particularly good job of looking after you in the future. We don't know if the pension's going to be around, what the government's going to be able to do to help you, whether you're going to be able to borrow against your super, whether there's going to be negative gearing or death duties or death taxes. What I do know is if you build a substantial asset base, you will have choices. And if you don't, you're going to have fewer choices. So as a property investor, your job is to build an asset base first. Once you've got a big asset base, then you can get all the cash you require. And there's a number of different ways of doing that. That's a chat for another podcast. Assets first. But to secure your financial future moving forward in these challenging times, you can't just buy any property. Just looking back over those last 30 years, as I mentioned, some properties increased in value again, and others just didn't. So you need a plan. You need to bring your future forward and plan. And to secure your financial future, you're going to need more than just a normal buyer's agent to help you. They tend to have a vested interest in helping you in the areas that they know about, and they're not particularly good at planning. You need more than a property strategist, and property strategists do plan, and our team at Metropole help with having buyer's agents and property strategists. But in my mind, you need a holistic, a 360-degree approach to ensure you can grow, protect, and pass on your wealth. And that's what we specialise at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au and you'll find out how we customise the solution to meet your specific needs using a time-tested system, so we give you the safety that you require to acquire wealth, whether you're a beginner buying your first property, an experienced investor wanting to add to your portfolio, or a significant investor wanting to manufacture growth by becoming a property developer. We have no properties for sale, but it all starts by putting a plan together for you, and then you can use some of our services or all of them, or just use the plan to help you get to where you want to go. Go to metropole.com.au, and I'd love to be part of your wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Today, I'd like to teach you the most important lesson you can teach your children about money. Now, You may not have children yet, you may not be planning to have children, or your children may have grown up, but I believe this lesson is so important, it'll be relevant for you as well. You see, we live in a world of consumption where people seek immediate gratification. We want the latest and greatest gadgets, and we want all those products as soon as they hit the shelves, don't we? Think about Apple and that ridiculously long line of people who queue up as soon as their iPhones are a year old. Now, when it comes to money management and becoming rich, though, patience and delayed gratification, the opposite of the quick consumption, that makes all the difference. Patient people are more likely to save their pennies rather than seek those easy and what tends to be expensive credit cards or those afterpay systems because they're happy to wait for their new car or the big TV screen or the latest gadget. They don't seem to have it all yesterday. Now, one of the common rich habits that I've mentioned a few times on this podcast, and that's a theme in my book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits with Tom Corley, is that we've found amongst the most successful people, they all share the habit of the ability to delay gratification. Successful people seem to possess a higher patience and an aptitude to postpone their enjoyment so that they can get more later on. They've got an ability to work hard to accomplish a goal which isn't achieved for a long time. Now, learning to delay gratification rather than seeking immediate satisfaction is an essential part of success, and particularly when it comes to things like investing, business, and making money. Yet it's not easy to change those ingrained habits and the approach to life that you've been practicing since childhood. But once you're aware of the importance of the concept of delayed gratification, in my mind it's entirely doable to change those habits. So you start with small alterations to your thought patterns. Well, first of all, by acknowledging your habits, those habits you've got to want immediate gratification. Remember, if it comes too quickly, chances are you're going to lose it again just as easily. Now, please stick with me because there's probably some people out there thinking, oh, you old fuddy-duddy, you don't understand all that. But I've been through it all before. By the way, now that I am financially independent, now that I've got a cash machine for my property portfolios, I don't have to wait. I don't have to delay my gratification. I'm not being smart or vain, but I can choose to buy or do whatever I want. But that's because I've built an asset base and I'm at the point where I am now. And if you're not there yet, I want you to get there by learning this concept of delayed gratification, because all good things take time. As Warren Buffett wisely said, wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. So if you're wondering what I'm on about, let me explain. The definition of delayed or deferred gratification is the ability to resist the temptation for an immediate reward and therefore wait for a later reward. Now, this later reward is usually much larger than the immediate one, and that's why it's worth waiting for. Research into the ability to delay gratification shows there are a number of other positive outcomes from this skill. It's been shown that you end up with more academic success, physical and psychological health, and social competence. Similarly, a person's ability to delay gratification relates to other skills such as patience, impulse and self-control, willpower, and they're all involved in self-regulatory behaviour. So if we think about the rich and successful people, one of their key rich habits is the ability to delay a small instant reward for a later but more generous one. But we need to remember that this skill isn't natural for most people. So if you're having difficulty with it, don't feel bad. Humans are wired for instant gratification. We love it. Now, while evolution made us that way long before money was around, unfortunately the desire for instant gratification doesn't help us when we're trying to become wealthy. In fact, it hurts us. That's one of the reasons many high-income earners are not rich. I see this all the time where people are earning more, but they're spending more and they end up on a treadmill. They tend to spend more than they earn because they need to support a lifestyle that's got little or no enduring value, but seems to come with a high fixed cost to maintain. Typically they spend things on, a bigger house, fancier cars, more impressive vacations. People, as they earn more and work up the rungs at work, they live a life of instant gratification. A life where they live in a peer group of other big spenders. So you've got to do what your mates do, don't you? And where you have to work harder and harder just to maintain the lifestyle that you no longer seem to have the time and energy to enjoy anymore because you're working so hard. Hey, isn't that what they call the rat race? Anyway, when it comes to the latest gadget or fad, as I said, most people have got no control. And this is made even worse in the technological world we live in today, where we've got access to instant money, real or otherwise. It's not just credit cards, it's now all these new after-pay systems. But too many people use their credit card for impulse purchases, and in reality, they've got no way of repaying that money anytime soon. And unfortunately, this type of mindset can quickly lead to financial ruin. So it's time to be honest with yourself. Are you a slave to instant gratification? If so, I just want to go through a couple of strategies to help you break the cycle. And if not, then please keep listening anyway. Congratulations, well done. But maybe you can tell somebody else about this episode, because there are so many people out there who have this habit. But the first thing to do is actually recognize that you've got the problem. So let me be clear. Consumer debt's never okay. Using a credit card for impulse purchases or to take on unnecessary extra debt for non-appreciating assets such as cars, or worse still, a personal loan to go on a holiday, that's never a good idea. Too many people see the limit on their credit card as their money. It's not. When you take on consumer debt, it involves using dollars you're hopefully going to earn in the future for current expenses or splurges, and then paying the bank interest for the privilege of doing so. This means that bargain that you paid for today is likely to cost you much more over the long run because you're using credit to pay for it. One of the key differences between people with consumer debt and those without, everything else being equal, is that that person with no consumer debt has generally mastered the delayed gratification system that we're talking about, while the other person, the person with consumer debt, hasn't mastered delayed gratification. The ability to wait to buy something after you've saved for the item, rather than impulsively purchasing something as soon as you realise you want it. That's what I mean by delayed gratification. The ability to invest money today to have money when you retire later, that's delayed gratification. And that's why you need to learn money management first, because there's no use taking on a large debt to invest in property or to set up a business or whatever you're going to do unless you understand the concept of delayed gratification. So investing money today to have more money for the future is, as I said, delayed gratification. So the real question, I guess, is how do you learn delayed gratification? Like I said, it's not easy, but it can become a skill in your Rich Habit Toolkit if you follow a few simple tips. So my first suggestion is write down a list of the money goals, your goals, and put them somewhere where you can see them every day. I know this sounds like rah-rah stuff, but it does actually work, the visualization. An even better idea is to tell somebody about your money goals, perhaps a mentor, somebody who can help you remain accountable to them. The next step is every time you feel tempted to purchase something, consider whether you want it or you need it. Is it a want or a need? If it's a want, such as, a new suit or a new handbag, then why not delay for at least 24 hours before deciding whether to buy it? Most of that time, that 24-hour period, is enough for you to see, hey, you don't really need it. For most expensive items, though, you probably should delay even longer than 24 hours. If you're buying another doodad online, how about putting it in your shopping cart, but don't click the checkout button. Instead, come back in 24 hours if you still need it. Okay, buy it. You'd be surprised how often that desire disappears. Now, there's a science behind delayed gratification. Let me explain. Many people I know believe that delayed gratification is one of the secrets to success, and I certainly believe it's one of them as well. You see, there's been numerous studies about delayed gratification over the years, psychological studies, and I thought I'd share just two of them with you to illustrate how it works. Now, a classic one that's often mentioned is the marshmallow study. Have you heard about it? In 1972, there was an experiment that tested children's ability to delay gratification. Now, in this experiment, a researcher offered a small child a choice. They could have one marshmallow now or two marshmallows if they could wait a mere 15 minutes. Now, the researcher left the child alone in the room with one marshmallow on a tray in front of them. And the child was filmed with secret video cameras. Now, of course, most children couldn't wait, and they soon ate the marshmallow. However, about 30% of them were able to delay gratification, and they got a second marshmallow. Now, interestingly, in the follow-up studies, these same children were tested for up to 30 years, and guess what happened? The ones that could wait for that second marshmallow, the ones that were able to delay gratification, were more successful later in life in all areas of their life. They got higher test scores at school. They seemed to have fewer problems with drugs. They were more likely to go to university or college. They had lower body fat. And as adults, they had more money. Now, according to the researchers, the children in the experiment used a number of techniques to delay gratification and control themselves. You see, they watched the videos, and I've seen some of them. You may have seen them on YouTube as well. Some of the children just turned around so they couldn't see the tray of marshmallow in front of them. Others covered their eyes so they couldn't physically see the marshmallow. Some even kicked the desk or pulled their hair out to distract themselves. Others stroked the marshmallow as if it was a toy or a doll or something. And of course, these were all techniques to control their focus. Sure, they were childish techniques, but hey, they were children, and they worked. What was clear from this experiment was that 30% of children who were lucky enough to have developed delayed gratification from a young age did so much better in life. But many people think that adults can also develop self-control through practice. And that's, I guess, what I'm suggesting for you if at this point delayed gratification or lack of it is a problem for you. You see, with that self-control, you can become more successful. You can reach your goals. In other words, the series of experiments that I was talking about proved that the ability to delay gratification is critical to success. So if you want to be successful, you're going to have to learn that skill. If you think about it, you can see the impact on success of being able to delay gratification wherever you look. If you can delay gratification of watching television and get your homework done as a child, you're going to learn more. You're going to get better classes, better grades. If you delay gratification of buying sweets or chips at the store, you're going to eat healthier and you'll be healthier too. If you can delay gratification of finishing your workout early, put in a few more reps or do another lap or two, you're going to be stronger. You're going to be fitter. So the question we need to ask ourselves is this: why did some children naturally have more self-control and were therefore destined for success? So more research was conducted to delayed gratification to find out this answer. Now, researchers at the University of Rochester decided to replicate the marshmallow experiment, but they actually made a special and important twist. This time they split the children into two groups. According to the study results, the first group of children were also exposed to an unreliable experience. They were let down. They were given a promise to bring bigger crayons or more stickers compared to the small selection they were originally given. But these promises didn't materialise. On the other hand, there was a second group of children that had reliable experiences given to them. They were promised better crayons or stickers, and they were provided to them. Now, it doesn't take Einstein to work out what consequently happened to the marshmallow experience, does it? The first group, having experienced broken promises, well, they had no reason to trust researchers. They didn't think they're going to bring them a second marshmallow, so they quickly ate the first marshmallow that was in front of them. On the other hand, the second group, they'd experienced delayed gratification training because their promises were kept. So they learned that waiting was worth it because they'd previously received better crayons or better stickers. So they had the capability of waiting longer. On average, according to the results, they waited an average of 4 times longer than the first group. In other words, the researchers found that children's ability to delay gratification and display self-control wasn't really a predetermined trait, but it was impacted by their experiences and by their environment that surrounded them. Now, I guess that's no surprise if you've actually had a look at how we develop. So, in fact, the effects of environment worked for them, but almost instantaneously. Just a few minutes of reliable or unreliable experiences was enough to push the actions of each child into one direction or another. Now, I hope you're finding this useful, and I hope you can understand then the thinking and the psychology behind why maybe you aren't as good with delaying gratification and why you should consider doing it. So thank you for listening. I've got a couple more points I want to make to you about this, because over the decades, these marshmallow experiments have been very popular and they've been tried by lots of other psychologists, but they're only one piece of the delayed gratification puzzle. Human behaviour, and I guess life in general, it's much more complex than that, isn't it? So let's not pretend that one choice of a 4-year-old is going to determine the rest of their life or her life or his life or how rich or successful they're going to become. However, my observation is that studies do highlight a very important rich habit. Waiting for that second marshmallow or better crayons or better stickers isn't easy. In fact, for children it's particularly hard. But what we can learn from this is you need to find the ability to be disciplined and take action instead of becoming distracted and doing what's easy. Success in nearly every field requires you to ignore something easier, in other words, delaying gratification, in favour of doing something harder. But that's one of the themes that I go through in my mindset message in my podcast regularly, isn't it? So the lesson from all this is that we all can develop the rich habit of delayed gratification and accepting what good things in life there are for us as long as we wait for them. Well, that was a big dose of me today, wasn't it? I didn't have any guests, any interviews, because sometimes I believe the information is that important that I want to make sure that I can pass it across to you myself. Having said that, I'll be back twice a week with regular information about money, finance, tax, success. So if you don't already subscribe to the Michael Yardney podcast, why not do so on your favourite podcast app? And if you'd like to catch up with me in between the twice weekly shows, just look out for Michael Yardney on social media. I'm in most places, and you could get even more information by joining the Property Update private Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, look for the Property Update group, where you're going to get exclusive information from me and a team of experts. Look forward to catching up with you again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?